Another thing is Solidity, right? Solidity is very poorly designed language. And it's very evident with all the exploits that we have today. It is really poorly designed language. You don't see the level of exploits you have with Solidity with any other language.
Hi, guys. Welcome to Behind the Creation, where I interview founders, core contributors, and leading members within the blockchain space to learn a little bit more about them and what they'd like to do. Also, learn about their passions, and then also learn about them as an individual as well. Today on the show, I have Greg from Akash Network. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks so much, Michael. This is fun.
Thanks for taking the time out today to dive into your history and then also things that you like and kind of like different hobbies as well. Kind of wanted to kickstart it off by asking you, how was it like what kind of like growing up, and where did you grow up?
Oh boy, can of worms. I grew up in rural India. Growing up, we didn't have much. We come from a middle class Indian family that, you know, was had enough, but not much, to put it simply. Well, we couldn't afford a computer, and I learned to code in the 90s. This is before the internet, using books. I do not remember a time I didn't know how to code. So it's like I started off very, very young. And the uh, good thing that I had going on was in India in general, I think in Asia in general, you have these like computer centers where you could go. If you're a member of the center, you can get some computer time. And there's a library there where you could go borrow books, right? So I would go, get the books from the library, go home, read those books, write my programs in a book, and come back and practice them the next day on a computer. So that's how I learned how to code. And internet came and changed the game for everybody. It was very simple. Just a boy with on a bicycle that would go and learn to code. And a lot of the reason I wanted to code was because of games. I loved games. Like any preteen or teenager would love. And there was a really, I would go play games wherever I could play games, right? Friends would have computers, computer centers would have computers, and I wanted to take my games with me wherever I go. So, and these games were very large to fit in a floppy disk. A floppy disk, for those of you that don't know what it is, it's pre-USB disk, and it had 1.2 megabytes of memory, right? And that's not very much. So something like Prince of Persia, like the 2D version, would the first version would fit in a single disc, but if you want Prince of Persia 2, it would take 10 discs. So you had to break that file into multiple pieces and assemble them when you want to play the game. It takes a long time just to get a game going, right?
I
So
remember the
I
days
wrote,
of the floppy disk days where it's kind of like
yeah,
having like 10 different ones just to play one.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I had to write code to automate that process. I like to call that my first distributed computer, you know. So that's me growing up, and also had this entrepreneurial gene in me where I would lend my floppy disks to other people for money, for them to go play and rent my games. So that's how I made my first rupees, you know. And I, absolutely, by the time I got to school, high school, that's when I was introduced to the internet in 98, got my Hotmail account. It was fun. And that's really when the game changed for me. So I learned web programming in 98 by reverse engineering websites, because for the first time you can actually see the source code behind them. And you right click and see see view source in the browser, right? And I learned how to do web programming through a series of books and reverse engineering and whatnot, and uh, built my first set of websites. And soon, web programming was such high demand that I was making money working in gigs here and there. So that sort of like taught me self confidence on, hey, you can actually, you know, the thing that I find fun would actually make money. And once you understand as a teenager how the things that you can actually have fun and earn a living, I think there's nothing that's going to stop people. So I'm very passionate uh, in uh, in educating kids to do what they love and find ways to make a living out of that life, right? And it takes dedication and work, but in hindsight, if you look back, it was mostly fun, more than earning, right? So I think that
Now,
was yeah.
did you have kind of like a support group with you that were like all, everyone that was at the library that was also learning to code as well, or was it kind of like just you in the beginning? Because I remember you saying that, you're taking all of this knowledge home, you're trying to write it down on a piece of paper, trying to go home and kind of like review it and then go back to the library to try to test it. Was there other kids that are also involved in it as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was a big part of my growing up too. There was a support group. There were seniors. There were people older than me, usually way cooler than me, right? That would help me out when I'm stuck. I mean, it was definitely a support group. And one of the reasons why I founded Angel Hack, the hackathon-based accelerator, the largest one in the world at that time, was because to encourage folks to form the support groups, right? Because the collaboration while learning is one of the best things that can happen. And I've noticed in the US and the West in general that sort of like collaboration was not similar to how it was in the East, right? People are a lot more collaborative in the East than the West that I've noticed. Uh, West is inherently more shunned away, I suppose, most of the cultural things. So having hackathons, bringing people together, building communities is something I really enjoy doing, and it comes very natural for me from where I grew up.
And I remember kind of like the floppy disk days too. It's like, if you know how you can kind of lock it, so like
Yeah,
sometimes the games wouldn't work. But I was a little bit past that. I was more into the CDs, so I was basically like placing on ROMs and things like that. And it's like early USBs into like emulators and everything for Super Nintendo, and then just sharing it with like my classmates and everything. So like we
yeah.
found out that the school library has a firewall that doesn't allow for emulators to play, but we found out through the PowerShell that we can override it and we run it as administrator. So it was like cool things like that. Like we kind of like also figured out too. Now same thing for you guys. Like what cool things did you guys kind of like pushed into in the early phases of programming, especially as like a support group early on? Like what were you guys looking at mostly, like
Yeah.
web design or Java?
No, this is way before Java, right? So this is like, I mean, I was doing C++, 94, 95. Um, Java was a fringe language back then. I think Java was more 2000s. Uh, it's a cool thing. One of the cool things, like your floppy disk locking, was we would do, there was something called Nobel Netware. It's a networking software for DOS, right? So Microsoft DOS, this is before Windows, right?
Mhm.
Microsoft DOS didn't support networking natively, so you had to use Novel Netware to network. And so we would create these ASCII hidden character directories, because Novel Network was all about mounting directories that it would be impossible for you to decipher unless you know the right ASCII code. So we had all kinds of crazy, complex directory structures that are hidden ASCII code. So the games would be hidden somewhere in these directories, and you needed a floppy disk with a decoder to access this. So we are hiding stuff in plain sight, but at the same time, in like obfuscated directory structures. That was fun. And by the time I got to 10th grade, Noel was everywhere. It was very insecure. I would hack into the school computers and steal exam questions way before the exam. So I was a school kid that you would come to, right? So I would do all kinds of crazy, crazy things like that. And I really had fun hacking into neural network software. It was so insecure back then. Um, and yeah, so yeah, I mean, then the real cool stuff came during web era because that's when I would connect to the internet and I would connect with people across boundaries, right? Like this is at a time when placing an international call was so expensive. So we had no contact with the outside world, you know. But just being able to talk to people or chat was just mind blowing.
It's like
That
AOL, MSN, chat
IRC,
rooms, IRC as well. Yeah.
IRC. Uh, MSN did not have chat. MSN chat came way later, right? So
Mhm.
IRC was the primary way you would chat, like so uh, LOL, all that came from IRC, right? Like it's cool.
I found
It's good stuff.
I found a flaw in AOL early on. So like if you basically got their CDs, they used to give the CDs away
Right.
for DSL at like grocery stores and everything. I found out that after a while, a lot of the keys would most like you can repeat the keys as long as you change the address on there. And it didn't do verification for checks for basically like the bank accounts and everything. They
Mm.
used a solver that makes it to where it feels like if this is potentially correct as a routing number and an account number, then it doesn't
Mm.
flag it for the next 3 months. So for 2 years, I had free dial-up service for AOL, and a lot of the kids were like, "Yo, just how are you doing?" And I was like, "Just placing these different numbers." And I actually sold it on, I sold it on pieces of papers at school and everything. And then afterwards, they're like, "Hey, if you need support, go into AOL." And with on AOL, this is before AIM had like voice channels and all these things,
Mm.
but I was able to kind of like conduct basically like my first version of like helping someone get onto the internet, because like for some weird reason it was like aunties and uncles from like everywhere around the neighborhood. We were like just getting on AIM, they got on AOL, and they were like just messaging me, how do I do this, how do I do that? It's just helping them on board. That
Yeah.
was like the greatest feeling. um so yeah, like for now you're in the high school phase, you're hacking into exams, you're not you're getting just the test answers and everything. um whenever you were thinking of switching over to college, was that something that you were like, hey, it's coding's a no-brainer, or was there other areas that you kind of wanted to go into as well?
I mean, by the time I got to college, I was making money as a software engineer doing gigs. Like I would develop hotel management systems. I would just develop enterprise software, right? Like literally in Visual Basic, ASP. Um, so by the time I got to college, I was already doing Java, just dabbling on Java. I was like a self sort of like thought programmer, um, and um, and yeah. So I joined to major in computer science, and soon I realized I there was nothing that the school could teach me that I didn't know. Looking at like fourth year syllabus, so I didn't want to waste my time there. So I did a radical shift to bioinformatics major, bioinformatics and biomedical major, with a minor in AI, with artificial intelligence. This is in 2000, right? That was not a very smart shift because I had to take 5 extra bio subjects and to even, qualify. And it was brutal. But I learned a lot about biotechnology, so by the time COVID hit, I kind of knew a lot about like pathology and whatnot. Just from my days. I never really worked in bio professionally. And same thing with AI. It was just more of a curiosity. I never really worked on AI professionally until now, I suppose, but took 20 plus years to get here, right? But it was one of those like um, skills that I developed because I had interest in, and I was still doing a lot of software. I was still working for American companies building software, and that paid through my college, and I made enough money to come to the States on H-1B visa, which is a professional visa that you get if you are a software engineer, for example, and if you're qualified, and if you're hired by an American company. And it was yeah, I was never really professionally involved with my actual college education.
Now, for kind of like software development, what do you like about it and what do you hate about it? So like the two opposites of it. Which one
Hmm.
do you like about it and what do you really hate about it?
What do
It
I
can be
like
anything,
about it?
whether it's a culture, whether it's like different programming language, whether it's, anything.
Yeah, I mean, for context, I my job now, I'm the CEO of Overclock Labs, being at it for about 8 years, right? The best part of the job is really the coding. I feel more productive when I code. So nothing else comes close to the satisfaction I get from software development. Nothing, right? I'm a builder, and that's you accept it, and then you move on with life. And when I feel unproductive, in the sense when I'm doing a lot of meetings or a lot of other non-software building things, I code just to feel productive, so I can get back to other non-productive things. So I use the best thing about software development, I think, is the gratification that you get instantly, and that's also the worst thing about it, because the instant gratification, when you're used to it, it makes you sloppy in other areas of life where you don't have the same speed to gratification. So so it really comes down to the best thing and the worst thing about software development is gratification cycles. And and I lose time with software. I don't have a sense of time. And I can just sit and code for 10 hours, not get up from my chair. So the bad thing is, when you're 40 like me, it starts affecting your health quite a lot. And if you have other responsibilities like family, it starts impacting those responsibilities quite a lot. So I do not like the antisocial elements of software. And I do not like how unifocus it makes me as a human being. I get hyper focused with software, and I can't sort of like break that, and I cannot multitask, right? Like, so, and those skills are important when you're having a family and stuff. So I don't know. I think adulting is very hard when you're writing software.
But but I think it kind of comes with the same thing as like it's your passion, it's not something that you feel as like a job that's going to be something that, oh, you have to complete this. It's like
Right.
you're in the moment of it and you're like, holy crap, I could do more. I can, you want to perfect it because it's an art, right? You're
Yeah.
mastering your art and you're kind of placing it out to perfection. And tunnel vision does happen a lot,
Yeah.
especially with like developers, but even if it's any type of passion as well, artists at the same time get divulged into their work to where they're like, hey, the last stroke, it takes days for them to finish a piece.
Right. Yeah. I suppose that's with anything that you're passionate about. So I cannot comment or like think of how it is for someone doing software development as a job purely to make money versus someone like me that would code no matter what, right? Like, if you like, regardless if I make money or no, I just like to code because that's my escape, that's my therapeutic. As I feel home when I'm coding. I cannot remember a time I did not know how to code, so it's like very like natural to me, right? So it's a different sort of
Mhm.
like trade-offs when it comes to someone that's really passionate about versus someone that's doing a job, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any too many downs. And another big downside is like, well, you get out of date very quickly if you don't keep up. And I was just talking to somebody this morning as to how how out of date I'm with web programming, because I haven't developed web in a long time. About 13 years I haven't touched web. And I'm looking at building a few clients for Akash. I'm looking at all the stack, and I'm like, go with Ruby on Rails, and people would shut up on me because apparently Ruby is not cool anymore. in my time, Ruby was amazing, fast, right? So now it's all the latest and the greatest, right? And you have all the React stack, which I'm not like extremely familiar and I dislike working in JavaScript in general. I think it's a poor language. But another annoying thing is, really annoying thing about software development is all this bad software gets wide adoption. And I don't know how to
Explain.
JavaScript.
Mhm.
JavaScript was not designed to be used like the way it's being used right now. It was literally designed in 20 days as a scripting language for the web. It was not designed with security, with not scalability, any of these patterns people develop, but it's so, you know, like poorly designed, and that's somehow spilled into Node.js, and then you have this whole stack of JavaScript, right? Same thing with well, PHP, you can say similar, right? Another thing is Solidity, right? Solidity is very poorly designed language, and it's very evident with all the exploits that we have today. It is really poorly designed language. You don't see the level of exploits you have with Solidity with any other language. Uh, why? Because it's just not supposed to be used the way it's supposed to be used. It's being used. And it's always something that I never could decipher. Like, why would bad software get adoption while good software doesn't? Where's that click, right? Like, it's just hard for me to sometimes really get that going.
Mhm. I think that the reason why they're choosing and picking on Solidity right now and kind of like attacking it is because it now comes into like the crypto aspect of like you could hack a protocol and still be anonymous. So it's kind of like in the Web2 world is if you're hacking into like an infrastructure, most likely someone can kind of combat you and potentially have you arrested by checking your IP or whichever. Compared to this one where it's like it's the wild wild west, and even for like Solidity or even like the early days of Bitcoin as well. Bitcoin was also hacked too, but I think that with Solidity they're targeting it more because they're getting away with it. Everyone's able to get away with it, especially after they do it a few times.
No, a professional hacker would know how to obfuscate the IPs and all that good stuff. I don't think it's that aspect of it. It's just it's easy to exploit Solidity than any other language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, trust me, it's just, yeah, it's very easy to exploit, and it's very hard to replicate and simulate using Solidity like the way you would do other languages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's always an on and off ramp. Like, it's just different primitives today. Like, okay, if you're cashing out Bitcoin, there's always an off ramp to a Bitcoin, right? Like, so you're going to eventually like take the money out of the real world. So when does that happen, right? Like, so of course there's more, I guess, like importance for uh anonymity in your traditional, like, um in your Solidity base or like decentralized software, but I don't think that's the only factor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, why don't
And
you have similar levels of exploits in Rust? You know, like,
mm,
maybe Rust is not being used as much as Solidity. I mean, you could say that, but I don't know. I think the language is not very, very strong.
and like it also for kind of like exploits as well, kind of like exploiting the different systems, like how you're exploiting the school system and everything in the beginning phase. In terms of like your kind of like your childhood dynamic, like your mom and your dad, was it a supporting kind of like family structure to where they're like, hey, look, you pursue your dreams, if you want to go into coding, go into coding, here's where you can go learn more? Were they very supportive? Because like some family dynamics were like, hey, look, you just got to go straight to work right after your right when you can make money, while the others are like, hey, we want to help you learn more about your passion and push on.
Yeah, actually, one of the best things about growing up was my supporting dad and mom, right? They were very, very encouraging. In fact, like I went to a boarding school because the place I grew up was born and raised, didn't it was rural and really didn't have much in terms of education, quality of education. So I was sent off to a boarding school. That's how I developed. I mean, learned the English. It was a British boarding school, right? So every time I would come back for my summer vacation, my dad would put me into something. So first vacation I was doing, I was learning how to type. Before I learned how to code, I actually went and used a typewriter, like this old school typewriters, learn how to type because that was critical for me to type on a keyboard later, right? So I think like in general, the emphasis on like these fundamental skills that I was given, like me going to a boarding school and getting exposed to international crowd, really, learning English there was very critical for me to go learn computers. And I would just spend time at the computer center till like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And my mom would call and like she would very supportive, but at certain time limit in the night, she'd be like, come back home. uh, and they encouraged me pretty well. Like they didn't have much money to afford computers and whatnot, but they wouldn't stop me from doing what I was doing. Right? They would encourage me. They would like take me to computer center. Like my dad would give money for me to go browse the internet and all that stuff. Right? Like yeah, they whatever they could set aside, they were able to. And in fact, growing up, I think not having too much money or not made me very, very resourceful. Like I built my first computer myself. I did not buy it.
Oh,
I would
nice.
scavenge parts, like whatever I could find. So that taught me a lot about computers that I wouldn't otherwise know. Like you buy things, you get entitlement, and you forget the art of the the build or the struggle, right?
My
Uh,
my mom
yeah,
was so pissed because she bought me a computer, and the first thing I did was I broke it apart because I was like, I don't understand this machine. So I tore down everything, and like I tried to reassemble it, and I was like, oh, something's not working. I had to
right.
run to the library and get a book on how to put computers back together in order to kind of like place everything back together. And took me about a week, but was able to craft some of the pieces. And literally from there, learned what a GPU is, what a motherboard is, what is, what a graphics card is, and everything too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love building computers. I still do. I mean, I have building one at home, my supposed gaming machine that I don't know how long it's going to take to finish, but let's
But
see.
you're building one of the strongest GPU machines and
Of
well
course.
cloud machines available like right now. So it's kind of like you're going from the early stage of like just small piece to now kind of like having this global infrastructure of machines connecting together.
Yeah, it just never stopped.
Now for so like boarding school and everything, was there any other hobbies that kind of like you picked up on that you really enjoy doing besides coding? Like any hobbies that you have that are very intriguing for you?
Absolutely. I love building creation, right? I'm a builder. Uh, I think builders are such key elements of human society uh, that are overlooked in general. Like before a builder, when a builder actually figured out how to put a stone on a stick, that's when the human being went from being the prey to the predator. So being a builder, I take a lot of joy and pride in building things and um, creating in general, right? So I love art. I like drawing as part of my building. I was doing a lot of cartooning. Cartooning is one of those skills where I could express the portrait and the character in a single format. I think visual arts are way more expressive than prose in general. So I love visual art. And cartooning takes a long time, and being an entrepreneur, you don't really get that sort of like dedicated time that I would otherwise want to cartoon. So I shifted to black and white film, analog photography. And analog is something I really enjoy because I could freeze the moment in time, and I could do that without distraction, without the screen coming in your way, without the color, without uh, all the other distractions that you would get with a traditional digital camera, right? So I really enjoy the process of taking black and white film pictures. I Now that I think about it, I owe you a few pictures that I still have that, and I haven't really. They were okay. I saw them, but I didn't really think I did a good job at it as much as I would love to. So that's why I'm reluctant to like not work on the picture. But black and white film just has a different mode. Any picture I take just becomes way better, right? So I'm also dyslexic, and so I get you know very dyslexic and ADD. A few perks of learning how to code very early in life. Um, so for me, a color picture is very distracting because too many things moving, too many variables to optimize for in a color. Whereas black and white is simply lines and light. That's how I look at black and white. That's why I like cartooning. It's just lines and light, right? You're literally playing with light. And I've gotten really good at it to a point where there was at a time I was paying half my rent by selling pictures online. So, a hobby became a profession to a certain degree. And always a case, something I really enjoy, something somehow it automatically becomes a profession. I didn't let it fully develop to a full profession because it's not a profession that I want to be associated. I want to have. Um, um, and yeah, so that's really my passion. I don't enjoy color photography at all. Or digital photography as much as I do film.
I think you should post some of the pictures because like an artist is always the hardest on themselves. They
Yeah,
always want perfection and kind of like how you were saying earlier, oh no, the pictures aren't going to be that great. But I've to us as users or like just having it to where you actually capture in the moment is something that may be looking, maybe not the best work for you or the best work that you've had or anything so far, but it might be something that's really memorable for someone else. Because like capturing them in a moment, for example, like I just had my wedding and there was so many blurry pictures of all of the ones that my friends would send me, but the one that actually caught my eye from the photographers was basically the one that I was not even looking at them. It was kind of like I wasn't paying attention to them capturing the moment,
candid.
and it
Yeah,
was like I'm staring at my wife for the first time, and like she's walking down the aisle, and I'm like just tears in my eyes. Like that photo to me, unedited, like it's like I told him to send over all the raw footage, all the raw information, all the raw pictures and everything. And I was like, it doesn't even need to be edited at all.
that's the thing about black and white film is you don't need much editing at all, and it just comes out incredible. It's very hard to take it, but once you take it, it just comes out so beautiful. You're like, holy shit, man! Like an average photographer can get really good with a black and white camera, a film camera. If you learn how to see the light, that's the trick in black and white, right? You really need to know to see the world in black and white. That means I'm looking at you, I'll be like, I'm not going to look at the color. I'm just going to look at the light. I'm going to look at the line where the light is falling, right? And once you can look through a black and white lens, naturally, you become a master photographer, I suppose, right? So I guess that's also a difference between good photographer and not, but you got to learn how to look through that. And the hard part about analog is there are no electronics, right? So you have to compose and set the exposure right. Exposure is how the combination of how much light and for how long is falling on the film. It's just pure physics at that point, right? And chemistry, just light literally burning a photosensitive film.
Mm.
And the that's the hard part about analog. You really need to know. You really this nailed exposure, and that's, without
I,
feedback, right? Without gratification. So as much as I love instant gratification with the code, I think the thing I most enjoy about film is the delayed gratification. Quite opposites, right? Like,
you wait
and
till it produces out, and then you kind of like see the end result afterwards.
yeah, and there's this delay. There's no rush. There is no like instant sort of like going back and forth. Oh, I like this or not. You just focus on the moment. You freeze the moment. You do the best you can at the moment, and don't try to overthink that moment. That's really what black and white photography teaches me. Good lessons in life, if you think about it.
and and like I guess it's like similar to like coding too. It's kind of like black and white. This is what it's not well, coding could be colorful in a sense, but in terms of like black and white is like basically the code is, whatever the code is written as is this is what it's going to perform as a function. Right. So it's kind of like both sides, whether it's the black and white photo where it's very straightforward, straight and concise. Same thing as code is like unless you add AI to it, the code is going to conform to the exact same way that you actually programmed it to be.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's kind of like I guess onto the next question I would want to ask you is that growing up, was there any challenges that kind of like came your way that you want to inform to others and let them know that this is there's always going to be pain. Let me restart and rephrase this. Growing up, was there kind of like any hardships or any pain points in your life that you felt like was a defining factor and kind of like shaped you as a person?
um I wouldn't say one thing, but it's series of events, right? So like not having much, being trying to be resourceful. I think that had an incredible impact on my life, because that removed a sense of entitlement, right? Because everything was like you have to earn. Like, okay, computers, I want to learn how to use computers. I can't buy one, so I'm going to figure out how to build one, instead of like being adamant on like and having putting that pressure on my parents to get me a computer. So, and I think my mother really did a great job in raising us to really, really understand the situation financially, and and ingraining into us that anything in life you have to earn it. We can't um, expect things. Just put it that way. And I think that had a huge impact on life, right? Like, so I came to US with $500 in my pocket. I borrowed from my friend. So I had no money. I had no sort of like support. I came on a professional visa because I got that visa from a job, and I found a job. And so it was sort of like without any support, without any, most immigrants have similar stories. So, pretty sure your parents had similar stories too, right? So I think as uh, that lack of entitlement, that earn everything you need, ingrained in like me to seek out whatever I need to seek out, I would go earn it, right? So, um, and I think most immigrants have similar stories, right? Similar sort of like came to the country with nothing, like, hey, now we have this great life and whatnot. Um, and I didn't have any other adversarial sort of like events that are less boring. It's very straightforward. It's just get earn anything you need.
Yeah, like I had to start working at like 12 or 13. Um, Basically my mom took out a loan to buy the computer, and within like 4 or 5 months, I actually paid off the computer by making money online. And that was kind of like my early foray into kind of like learning more about how do I help and push back and give my mom more money Because like for us, same thing. It was like we didn't have a lot of resources, but for me, the same struggle as you got to push or else you're not gonna get out of your current situation. So I sold
Yeah,
CDs, I sold like bootleg movies,
yeah,
I sold emulators on like on USBs and everything.
yeah,
We
yeah. Same thing, yeah, right? Like I didn't have money similar to your footstep. We didn't have a lot of money to afford college, for example. I paid for college by taking loans, but also paying off the loans with money I was able to earn through my software career. So a lot of things like, yeah, similar. Like I think it may be an Asian thing,
yeah.
maybe an Asian thing where you're thought out, you know, you are um thought to like not take anything for granted, right? Like it, uh, yeah, I keep wondering like how that is going to translate to my kids that are going to be like raised here with a lot that they didn't have. But yeah, but that was such an important lesson. Like you have to go support your family, right? I grew up, and my first paycheck I would send 50% of that home, right? Like and I would pay for my sister's college. Thankfully she's now a very successful woman. She's a vice president at Chase Bank, and she's VP of IT. Right, she's a female in tech, which is awesome. Um, so she's like all these investments really paid off. But if that was not ingrained in the fact that we didn't have much, I don't know how I would turn up. Like, and I would turn up to be a brat. I
What
think.
what are some of the I would say like key lessons that you would like to let new founders know? So like anyone that's coming into the blockchain space or kind of like thinking about developing or thinking of starting to create their own companies, like what early lessons that you learned from that you would like to have them as a piece of advice know?
I think the big surprise for me, and I think it's most for most founders, is how long it takes to be successful. Most people think 3 years, 4 years. No, it takes about much longer to succeed than most people think. You you hear overnight successes, like you hear a lot of this company that turned overnight, but like you know, but if you really like peel the onion, you see there was years of struggle, right? Like to come to success. Um, and I think this just applies for everything in general for entrepreneurial. If you're starting a company, unless you think you're going to be with a company for at least 10 years, do not, right? There's no quick buck. There's no like launching a DeFi protocol and getting rich and getting out, right? Like unless you're signed up for 10 years, do not engage. Um, and that comes to how you plan your life, right? Like if you're um, not 100% dedicated, uh, it's going to be challenging. It's not impossible. It's going to be challenging. So you're going to have to figure out ways to, uh, work around those challenges. And a lot of times when you have family and kids, especially, it becomes even more challenging unless you're prepared to, right? So a lot of times I think for founders that, um, you know, have kids mid journey, like, while you're starting a company and 2 years later, 3 years later, then you have kids, it becomes such a disruption that you have two babies now, right? So far you're used to this one mode of functioning, but now you have two babies, right? So it's almost better to do a startup after kids or not have kids. But having kids while doing a startup is extremely disruptive, right? So think those are the things that you got to plan for, right? Like if you're starting a company and plan to have kids in 3-4 years, be prepared and take a lot of advice on how do you handle two babies, right? Because it's going to be very disruptive, and or not don't plan for kids for and be very clear about your goals, right? So I see a lot of second-time founders with kids extremely successful, right? Like, in fact, kids make you a lot more successful, a lot more disciplined. But you need to embrace that, right? And that's what takes time to really understand how to allocate time, how to, you know, like divide priorities, right? Because one thing is not more than the other. It is just really about allocating time for your priorities, right? And working around that. That's the only piece of advice. I think just a 10-year outlook minimum. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about cutting short. Some take longer, but at least it's going to take 10 years for you to succeed.
I have my my one of one is minting around December or January. So we just found out that we're having a boy. So starting a startup and having a boy at the same time, finishing up everything.
Fun.
It's gonna be a challenge, but uh, hopefully I'm ready.
It's challenging, so just be prepared for it. That's what I was, that's the advice that I give for family and kids. I know how hard it is to have family. So and my co-founder, he's two kids, right? Like he's uh and it's hard. It's very, very hard.
Now, in terms of kind of like a team dynamic, especially around founders as well, what do you think is kind of like a perfect dynamic or a suitable dynamic for, you know, the core founders?
Complementary skills, not similar skills. Very, very important.
Mm.
If you have similar skills, you're going to have a lot of conflicts. And if you have complementary skills, the chance of success is very high, right? And and I've struggled with this both. Like with my co-founder, we're both technical, so we have conflicts in technical decisions. But then within technical, we're very complementary in the sense like I'm good at uh making more humanly readable and designing even the code to be more humanly optimized interfaces, whereas Adam is extremely good at meta. He's very, very meta, right? I'm not even close to how meta he gets. So we have complementary skills within software, but bigger overall, we may have conflicting skills when it comes to technical. So it's a challenge navigating. We've been, co-founders for 8 years, so it's we figured out, right? Uh, Sometimes it can be rewarding in the early days. Actually, it's very good if you can like both code, right? Like it was amazing because we were so sick and tired of working with business people that we didn't want business people in the company in the beginning. Um, in hindsight, I think that was a mistake because we were too engineering focused and too sort of like technical focus versus like the business side of things. So I think it's important to have that complementary skills in starting a startup. Like you should ideally get someone with business skills earlier on. Uh, that is not just a pure businessman, but I think is technically inclined person, not someone that doesn't understand technology. And that you have those people as well, but they don't really do great for a startup.
Mhm.
And uh, yeah, yeah. So yeah, complementary skills, as much complementary as possible is better for early days, right? So that's my piece of advice when it comes to like selecting a co-founder.
Now, for kind of like a quote that you live by, so like I'll give you an example of a quote that I live by. A man can have $1 million and he can go broke overnight. The last thing he can have is his word. If he no longer has his word, he is no longer valuable. Like that's just the like that's one of the quotes that I live by. But what is kind of like one of the quotes that you live by?
Sorry, a man can have $1 million and can lose overnight.
Yeah, so a man can have $1 million and then lose it overnight. He will still have value and worth because his word is still worth money. Um, Whenever he loses his word, he is no longer valuable. As in, if someone's lying constantly and things
Reputation.
like
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
What are the words I live by? Huh? Let me think of that. Let me think of that. I'm like I'm like this deep values, loosely held kind of guy. So I don't live by a certain value chain because those values keep changing, you know, with enough conviction. So this put it when I go deep, I go deep. I don't go broad, but I'm also, very, very, very um, um, open to changing those values, right? Like, so I don't know how I would say like the other words that go by, right? I don't think so.
Or
I
is there
don't think
any
so.
values that you will never change? Like that's your core values.
Yes, the core values I would say would pragmatism or perfection, right? I think that's very, very important to me, especially when we're developing products, right? I like to be pragmatic versus perfect, and I always struggle with that quite a lot. And I want to strive for pragmatism or perfection, and the struggle is between the artist and the engineer, right? Um, um, I think empathy is one of those critical elements that without which there's no point in living, right? Like you could have the biggest company in the world, but if you're not empathetic to others, in your realm, you're not. What's the point, right? Like, what's the point of living? Uh, I believe in sovereignty. I believe, um, you know, a man should have complete control and over their destiny, without which uh, there is no life, right? So I don't know. I think those three key values that I could think of top of my head.
I like it. I like it. Especially the kind of like the control part. Because like there is things that we can't control, some things we can't control. Another one I also live by is like Bruce Lee is like be like water, just go with the flow.
Yeah.
Just kind of like just
Strong
as
values,
things come
deeply
up,
held. Deep values like loosely held, right? Like
yeah.
I actually had a huge Bruce Lee mural in my office. The first office, overclocked office, first Akash office, right? Uh, I love Bruce Lee, one of my favorite, my childhood hero, right? Because everybody in the world knows Bruce Lee. It's crazy how famous Bruce Lee is, and not too many people know Chuck Norris, right? Like Chuck Norris only knew coming to
It
America.
only came on with the recent memes, but afterwards it was like, all right, Chuck Norris memes, but Bruce Lee has been there for, I mean, any
Yeah,
culture, whether it's US, Asia, Africa, Europe, like anywhere around the world, he's noticeable.
he
But
said something that I really one of the amazing Bruce Lee quotes I think that resonated with me a lot growing up. He said something like, "I fear not the man who can do 1,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who can do one kick 1,000 times."
yeah, I think I know that quote too. It's basically like he was saying that you can kick 1,000 times, but if someone practiced that exact same kick every single time, it's gonna be powerful.
I think that stuck with me quite a lot. Like that, you know, that that discipline in doing the same thing over and over again and having the trust that is going to get really good, like having that specialty, right? Like that's it's one of the things that startups as especially it resonates with me with what Bruce Lee says. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to have 1,000 features in your product to be good. You just need to have one feature that nobody has. It's all that matters. And that one thing is that's what we get really good at, right? Like so, that actually has quite a lot to do with Akash, right? Like we are we technically are an alternative to Amazon Web Services, but we don't have all the bells and whistles of a Amazon Web Services. We don't have nearly close to all the capabilities of Amazon, but we have one thing that Amazon doesn't, that's open source, right? And that translates to everything we need. Now we have GPUs, the high-end GPUs Amazon doesn't have, right? So really about identifying the one thing that nobody else has and you have, and get 100% behind that one thing. I think that's a key lesson in life.
Especially a competitive advantage too. Like Amazon is not able to scale as properly and as fast.
As a community, like I keep saying, community is the competitive mode for Akash. It's one thing that no one else has, no big cloud provider has, is a large community, open community.
Well, thank you, Greg, for coming on today, and thank you for being on here and sharing your insights, and also learning more about your background as well. So I'll go ahead and place all of the information to follow Greg on the bottom and everything. But before we go, is there any final thing that you would like to say to the audience, or kind of like a final piece of advice for them?
I'm bad at giving advice. I don't think I have like. Nah, I'm good. I actually had to run. So sorry.
No worries, no worries. All right.
Completely forgot.
Thanks, Greg, for hopping on.
I totally enjoyed it, Michael. Thank you so much.
Likewise. You have a good one. Bye.